In 2012, in Chengdu, Sichuan, a horrifying murder case shook an entire peaceful rural area. The mysterious crime scene left the public nationwide in a state of panic, while the police immediately launched an investigation. With sophisticated investigative techniques, the perpetrator was quickly brought to light. However, what no one could have anticipated was that this case led the police to uncover a series of terrifying serial murders involving unfortunate women. What exactly happened, and what clues led to the solution of this chilling string of crimes? In today's video, let's follow the police's investigative steps to unveil the haunting secrets behind these events. Hello. Welcome to the channel Whispers of the Moonlight. On January 2, 2012, in Sungyang Town, Shunshuan District, Chengdu, Sichuan Province, amidst the joyful atmosphere of the new year, a horrifying murder case shocked the peaceful rural area. Early in the morning, at 6 a.m., a local worker named Wu Mi was on his way to the construction site when he suddenly discovered the body of a woman lying motionless by the roadside in dense bushes. In the faint morning light, the victim's face appeared pale, her eyes wide open in a haunting expression. This horrifying sight led Wu Mi to immediately report the incident to the Shunshuan District Police Department. Upon receiving the call at 6 a.m., Shunshuan police arrived at the scene within 5 minutes. The area was quickly cordoned off to prevent any tampering with evidence. Investigators worked diligently to secure the site and prepare for forensic examination, while a forensic team was summoned to assist with the investigation. The first step involved investigators meticulously documenting the scene. The position of the victim's body was marked, and all surrounding evidence was carefully examined before any intervention. The crime scene was located in dense bushes along a trail leading from Nia village to Sungyang Town, a rarely frequented area in the early morning, creating favorable conditions for the crime. Signs of a struggle were evident at the scene. Some surrounding bushes were flattened, indicating the victim likely resisted before her death. A plastic bag was found near the victim's head, suspected to be related to the method of the crime or the perpetrator's belongings. Beneath the victim's feet was a pair of jeans, raising questions about the motive behind the crime, particularly regarding the possibility of sexual assault. No traces of blood or other signs were found at the scene, adding to the complexity of the case. Investigators concluded that with clear signs of struggle and inconsistent evidence, there was a high likelihood this is a complex case. The plastic bag found next to the victim's head may be a crucial clue, suspected to be related to the method of suffocation. However, it cannot be ruled out that the victim was murdered at another location before being moved here to dispose of the body. Before moving the body, the forensic team recorded the victim's condition, including posture, physical expressions, and other external signs. All information was carefully photographed and documented to reconstruct the sequence of events accurately. The victim was a young woman, estimated to be between 18 and 25 years old. She had shoulder-length short hair, and her wide-open eyes clearly showed fear and tension before death. The victim's hands were tied behind her back with a tank top, while her legs were tied with short jeans, likely the victim's own clothing. The lower body of the victim was exposed, with signs of severe sexual assault. The genital area was heavily damaged and bleeding, indicating extreme violence by the perpetrator. A mark was found on her neck, suspected to be caused by the plastic bag during the act. Mucus and foam mixed with blood were found in her mouth and nose, signs of an attempt to breathe in severe oxygen deprivation. The victim's lips, fingernails, and surrounding skin had turned cyanotic, with small petechial hemorrhages visible in the conjunctiva and oral mucosa. All these symptoms are typical of suffocation. The victim's face was swollen, possibly due to blood pooling in the head as breathing was obstructed. The biological signs and injuries indicate that the victim likely died from asphyxiation. At the crime scene, a plastic bag was found next to the victim's head. This further supports the hypothesis that the perpetrator used the plastic bag to suffocate the victim, causing her death. No other injuries were found on the body that could be life-threatening, further clarifying the initial cause of death. The victim's phone was missing, suspected to have been taken by the perpetrator to erase traces or avoid being identified. This raises the theory that the perpetrator acted with clear intent and had carefully prepared for the crime. The preliminary cause of death was determined by forensic doctors to be asphyxiation. Signs of injury, evidence at the scene, and the condition of the body will be analyzed further in the forensic lab to clarify the time of death, the method used, and identify the perpetrator. The police continued to gather information from the surrounding area and expand the investigation to reconstruct the sequence of events logically and comprehensively. After completing the initial examination, the police were divided into two teams to conduct more detailed investigations. Team 1 was responsible for thoroughly inspecting the area within a 200-meter radius of the crime scene to look for any remaining clues. Team 2 focused on interviewing residents living near the scene to identify the victim and gather related information. Team 1 carefully examined the extended crime scene. This was a desolate and barren area with no houses nearby, only dense trees and a trail leading from Sungyang Town to Nia Village. The location was isolated, especially at night, with only dim light from a nearby street lamp, creating ideal conditions for the perpetrator to act unnoticed. Meanwhile, Team 2 began taking statements from Wu Mi, the person who discovered the body. Wu Mi, 50 years old, is a construction worker living in Sungyang Town. He stated that early on the morning of January 2nd, while on his way to work past the area, he saw someone lying in the bushes. Curious, he approached and discovered that it was the body of a woman, immediately calling the police. Beyond this, he did not notice anything unusual. Team 2 continued to interview local villagers living nearby. Most people stated that they went to bed early and did not hear or notice any unusual sounds or signs. Last night, several individuals claimed that the victim appeared unfamiliar and did not resemble a local resident of Nia Village. This raised suspicions that the victim was not a local. Based on the collected information, the police concluded that the victim might have come from Sungyang Town, as the trail where the crime occurred is the only route connecting the town and Nia Village. The process of identifying the victim was promptly initiated. The police began examining the list of missing persons in Sungyang Town and cross-referenced it with the victim's distinguishing characteristics. The results of this verification process would play a critical role in guiding the investigation and tracking down the perpetrator. After the body was transported to the police station, forensic experts conducted a more detailed examination. Based on analyses of body temperature, rigor mortis, and initial decomposition signs, the time of death was determined to be approximately 4 to 5 hours before the body was discovered. This indicates that the crime occurred around 1 to 2 a.m., the time when the scene is at its quietest, providing optimal conditions for the perpetrator to act unnoticed. The victim's lungs were enlarged, showing clear signs of edema and filled with fluid. This was determined to be a result of prolonged oxygen deprivation, which caused severe damage to the respiratory system. The victim's brain also showed significant swelling. Prolonged oxygen deprivation led to cerebral edema, a common reaction in cases of asphyxiation. Brain swelling often causes severe damage to the central nervous system and quickly results in death if the oxygen deprivation is not addressed. Combining the observed signs and forensic findings, the cause of death was confirmed to be mechanical asphyxiation due to oxygen deprivation. This aligns with the initial hypothesis that the perpetrator used the plastic bag found at the scene to block the victim's airways, causing suffocation and leading to death. Based on the severe assault marks discovered on the victim's body during the autopsy, the police concluded that the perpetrator was a man. This conclusion was further supported by the extent of injuries, indicating violent and ruthless behavior, which is often associated with male perpetrators. However, the perpetrator acted with extreme sophistication, leaving no direct evidence that could lead to his identification. During the forensic examination, experts found no biological traces, such as mucus, DNA samples, or any other evidence from the perpetrator. This suggests that he was meticulously prepared, possibly erasing traces or using methods to conceal his identity after committing the crime. The investigation became more complicated as the area from Nia Village to Sungyang Town, where the crime occurred, had no surveillance cameras. This desolate trail, rarely frequented, lacked modern monitoring technology, making it impossible for the police to rely on footage to identify the suspect or his means of transport. Despite the absence of direct evidence, the police focused on the following measures: tracing males of working age, particularly those with suspicious behavior or a history of violence. conducting thorough investigations into the victim's coworkers or acquaintances to uncover any questionable relationships or prior threats, searching for suspects in the area and observing any unusual behavior around the time of the crime, issuing missing person alerts. Families with daughters who had not returned home in the past 3 days were contacted by the police for assistance. One day after the body was discovered, a family in Sungyang town came to the police station to identify the victim. It was the Liu family, and based on distinguishing features, they confirmed that the victim was their daughter, Liu Xiaolan, 19 years old. Xiao Lam was a worker at a textile factory in the area. The police interviewed the victim's family to learn more about her life and relationships to aid the investigation. Xiao Lam's mother, Mrs. Liu, stated that on January 1st, the victim left home at 8 a.m. to go to work at the factory. Mrs. Liu explained that the family was not worried when Xiao Lam did not return home that evening because she often stayed overnight at the factory dormitory. This was a common occurrence due to her job, and the family had grown accustomed to it. However, on January 3rd, when the police contacted them to confirm the victim's identity, the family was shocked to discover this horrifying tragedy. The police questioned Xiao Lam's dormitory colleagues to trace her activities before she went missing. During the interviews, Man Le, a close co-worker of the victim, revealed that around 9 p.m. on January 1st, she saw an unfamiliar man come to pick up Xiao Lam. According to Man Le, she overheard snippets of their conversation, where Xiao Lam mentioned going on a date. After that, the two left the dormitory together. This was the last time Man Le saw the victim. When asked why she was not concerned about Xiao Lam not returning to work the next day, Man Le said she did not find it unusual. Xiao Lam often took sudden leave to go out or spend time alone, so Man Le thought this time was no different. Man Le's testimony provided a crucial lead. A man had picked up Xiao Lam on the night of the murder. This was the only direct clue related to the case, as no one else witnessed the victim during that time. The police requested footage from the security cameras at the gate of the Fongquang textile factory dormitory, where Xiao Lam was last seen. The footage clearly captured the moment at 9 p.m. on January 1st, when the victim left the dormitory and got on a motorcycle. However, the motorcycle had no license plate, making it difficult to identify the owner through surveillance footage. The rider was a man approximately 1.7 meters tall with a well-built physique. However, he wore a face mask and a helmet, making direct identification challenging. Based on the motorcycle's direction of travel, the police tracked it through surveillance cameras on nearby roads. After some time, they discovered that the motorcycle stopped at a roadside noodle shop around 9:30 p.m. At the shop, security cameras captured the man getting off the motorcycle and removing his mask as he entered the shop. This footage revealed his face clearly. The police immediately saved the footage, took still shots from the video, and printed them for identification and tracking. After a day of thorough investigation, the police identified the man in the footage as Duong, 29 years old, residing in Sungyang town and working at a nearby printing shop. He was summoned immediately for questioning to clarify his connection to the case. At the police station, Duong stated that he and the victim, Liu Xiao Lam, had just met 2 weeks ago through social media. This was also the first time they met in person. According to his testimony, on the evening of January 1st, at around 9 p.m., he picked up Xiao Lam at the dormitory gate. They then went to a noodle shop at 9:10 p.m., ate for about 25 minutes, and continued to the Vin Phat arcade at 9:35 p.m. At the arcade, they spent some time playing games until 10:30 p.m., after which Duong drove Xiao Lam back to her home. He then returned to his own home at 10:45 p.m. He claimed that after returning home, he did not contact or meet Xiao Lam again and was unaware of her being raped and murdered. Duong emphasized that at around 12 a.m., he went to bed and did not leave his house throughout the night. To verify Duong's testimony, the police reviewed surveillance footage from a camera outside his home. The video clearly showed that at 10:45 p.m., Duong returned home. From that time until 7 a.m. the following morning, the footage showed no signs of anyone entering or leaving his house. Technical analysis by the expert team confirmed that the video showed no signs of being edited, spliced, or having data deleted. This confirmed that Duong Trung had stayed in his house all night and could not have committed the crime after that point. After ruling out the initial suspects and finding no further evidence at the crime scene of Lu Xiaolam's murder, the police returned to thoroughly re-examine the area where the body was discovered. They hoped to uncover overlooked clues or find new witnesses. However, despite days of effort, the investigation yielded no significant progress. The crime scene did not provide any additional details, leaving the investigation at an impasse. 2 months later, on March 3, 2012, the police in Sichuan district received a report about a new murder. The victim was a young woman named chap1, 25 years old, who lived in Nia village. Her body was found in a cornfield in the area. When the police arrived at the scene, they were shocked and concerned as the condition of chap1's body was identical to that of Lu Xiaolam 2 months prior. Both victims were young women who had been raped and killed by suffocation, with a plastic bag tightly covering their mouths. These similarities raised suspicions about the presence of a serial killer operating in the area. At the scene, the police conducted a meticulous examination but found no evidence pointing to the perpetrator. There were no traces of blood, suspicious footprints, or any items that could be used for tracking, similar to the previous case. The victim's phone was also missing, further reinforcing suspicions that both murders were committed by the same killer, who acted with great sophistication and erased all traces. When investigating chap1, the police discovered that she was an orphan with no immediate family. Her life was rather secluded, with little interaction with those around her. She only went to work and then returned home, with no notable romantic relationships or conflicts. These details made it even harder to understand the killer's motive and identify a suspect. Based on the similarities between the two cases, the police suspected that the perpetrator might be a serial killer. He had a clear modus operandi, targeting young women and committing acts of sexual assault, followed by murder through suffocation with a plastic bag. The disappearance of both victims' phones suggested that the perpetrator intended to erase communication traces or hinder the investigation. Despite employing modern investigative and forensic techniques, the police were unable to gather any significant new evidence. The perpetrator acted with extreme caution, leaving no traces at the crime scenes or on the victims' bodies. This led the investigation to a standstill. While all clues pointed to the actions of the same offender, on April 6, 2012, another murder occurred, intensifying the situation further. This time, the victim was a 17-year-old girl named Awa, living in Nia village. Awa had dropped out of school early and helped her mother with daily trading. Her body was discovered in a cornfield, the same location where chap1's body had been found 1 month earlier. The crime scene bore many similarities to previous cases. The victim had also been sexually assaulted and murdered by suffocation with a plastic bag. Once again, the victim's phone was missing, raising suspicions that the perpetrator acted with a clear purpose. However, this time, there were some differences at the crime scene. The victim's hands were not tied, and her shirt remained intact on her body, showing no signs of removal. It suggested that the perpetrator acted hastily or carelessly. This carelessness led to a significant breakthrough in the investigation. In the victim's fingers, the police found a few strands of hair that were shorter in length and of a different color than the victim's hair, likely belonging to the perpetrator. Additionally, forensic experts found mucus in the victim's body, providing a valuable opportunity to collect DNA, a crucial piece of evidence for identifying the perpetrator. The police immediately collected and carefully preserved the samples. The mucus and hair samples were sent to the laboratory for DNA analysis and cross-referenced with existing criminal databases. These pieces of evidence marked a breakthrough in the investigation, creating an opportunity to trace the perpetrator more specifically. After a day of focused examination of regional DNA databases, at around 11 p.m. on April 7, the police identified the main suspect in the series of murders. Anam, a 20-year-old resident of Nia village. Nam lived alone after his parents passed away long ago. His solitary lifestyle and presence in the area linked to the crimes drew significant attention from the police. Given the severity and brutality of the series of crimes, along with the high probability that the perpetrator would strike again if not stopped, the Sichuan Police Department immediately organized a special task force to handle the case. The task force quickly devised a detailed plan to monitor and apprehend Nam, ensuring both the safety of the public and the collection of evidence to prosecute him. Surveillance began that very night. The police discreetly monitored Nam's every movement to assess his level of danger and determine whether he intended to commit further crimes. At around midnight on April 8, the task force observed Nam putting on a coat and preparing to leave his house. At this point, every action he took became highly suspicious, especially given that previous crimes occurred during nighttime hours. Concluding that Nam might be preparing to commit another crime, the task force decided not to arrest him immediately at his house but to continue covert surveillance. The plan was to wait for the right moment to catch him red-handed, ensuring sufficient evidence for prosecution while preventing any risk to others. With close coordination between operational teams, the pursuit entered a tense phase requiring absolute precision in every action. By approximately 12:15 a.m., the task force discreetly followed Nam as he left his house and headed toward the cornfield, the site of 2 previous murders. This familiar location heightened the vigilance of the police. The officers carefully maintained their distance, staying hidden in the shadows to observe Nam's every move. After arriving at the cornfield, Nam stopped and appeared to be waiting for something. The task force continued to monitor him in silence. About 5 minutes later, a woman around 30 years old appeared from the opposite direction, approaching Nam. The two began talking, seemingly familiar with each other. Their conversation lasted about 10 minutes, but the task force noticed that Nam's demeanor began to change. His gaze became tense, and his behavior increasingly agitated. Suddenly, Nam turned to cover the woman's mouth with his hand, attempting to subdue her. This unexpected action immediately confirmed the task force's suspicion that he was preparing to commit a crime similar to the previous cases. Sensing that the time was ripe and to ensure the woman's safety, the task force acted immediately. Team members swiftly moved in to restrain and arrest Nam, while another team escorted the woman out of the area to ensure she was unharmed. Nam was completely caught off guard and had no time to react to the police's swift intervention. Both Nam and the woman were taken to the police station for questioning and further procedures. Upon arriving at the station, Nam initially appeared confused, but minutes later, he unexpectedly smiled in a cryptic manner. This behavior heightened investigators' suspicion and caution regarding the suspect's abnormal psychology. When questioning began, contrary to expectations that he might resist or deny the accusations, Nam quickly confessed to all the crimes in detail without hesitation. He admitted that he was responsible for all the previous murders. According to his confession, he would usually hide in deserted areas around Nia village, particularly in less frequented spots like cornfields. He would patiently wait until he found a suitable prey, usually a woman walking alone. Once he identified a target, he would immediately overpower the victim, dragging them into bushes or secluded areas to commit sexual assault. He would then use a plastic bag to strangle them until they died. When asked why he took the victims' phones after the crime, Nam appeared flustered and could not provide a clear answer. After a few seconds of silence, he lowered his head and refused to answer further, raising suspicions that the act of taking the victims' phones might be connected to another motive or a calculated attempt to erase traces. The police also interrogated the woman who had just been attacked by Nam but was fortunately rescued in time. The victim, named Lee Tawa, 30 years old, is a widow living in Nia village. According to her testimony, Wa stated that her life was extremely difficult. After her husband passed away, she had no stable job and struggled to make ends meet daily. She recounted that a few days earlier, she had met Nam through an acquaintance in the village. Nam appeared kind and promised to help her find a garment job to improve her life. Initially, she was skeptical, but his persuasive demeanor gradually gained her trust. On the night of the incident, Nam arranged to meet her at the cornfield to discuss job details, explaining that the location was private and free from interruptions. Although the meeting time was quite late, her desperation for a stable job led her to agree. When Wa met Nam at the cornfield, she initially didn't sense anything unusual. However, just a few minutes into their conversation, he suddenly turned hostile and attacked her with the intent of sexual assault. If it hadn't been for the timely intervention of the police, she might have become the next victim in his chain of crimes. The statements of Nam and Lee Tawa provided a clearer picture of the suspect's behavior and motives. And Nam's brutality, calculated coldness, and repetitive actions indicated that he was not just an impulsive offender but exhibited the psychological tendencies of a serial killer. This information played a critical role in completing the case file and strengthening the legal evidence to prosecute him. Although the series of murders had been partially resolved following Nam's arrest, Officer Tran, a seasoned investigator, believed there were still many inconsistencies in the sequence of events. He felt the case was far more complex than it appeared on the surface. Because of the series of unusual details that cannot be ignored, in the first two cases, the perpetrator seemed to act with terrifying precision. He left no traces whatsoever, from biological samples to clear evidence at the crime scene, causing the police investigation to hit a deadlock for months. These actions reflected not only caution but also intelligence and experience, qualities not typically associated with a 20-year-old like Nam. However, in the third case, the differences were striking. The perpetrator not only left behind his hair but also mucus in the victim's body. This was entirely inconsistent with the previously trace-free modus operandi. The question arises: how could someone so meticulous suddenly make such elementary mistakes? Additionally, the detail regarding the victim's phones further deepened suspicions. In all three cases, Nam took the victim's phones, yet he could not provide a clear explanation for his actions. Notably, he only presented the phone of the third victim, Awa, claiming he had lost the two earlier phones. However, when the police examined Ahoa's phone, they found nothing directly linking it to Nam if it were to fall into police hands. This made the motive for taking the phones highly ambiguous. If the intention was to sell them for money, such inexpensive phones would only fetch a few dozen yuan and would hardly justify the risk for the perpetrator. This inconsistency led Officer Tran to suspect that there might be a hidden motive or an undiscovered factor at play. Could it be that Nam is not the sole perpetrator? Is there someone else behind the scenes manipulating him? Or is he concealing something directly tied to the true motive? Click like and subscribe to follow our channel and watch part 2 to uncover who the real culprit is. Share your theories about this case in the comments below.